Hi Robert, this is Adrian Drummond and my friend Henry, and I thought we'd send a reply back to your post because I think there's a lot there to discuss. You were at Oshkosh. I wanted to go to Oshkosh and look at the Workhorse flying car they have there, because Workhorse builds a electric truck, a horsefly, and of course the flying car. So I wanted to check that out at Oshkosh. I'm glad you got to go and check it out. But you mentioned some things about ADSB that I thought I should reply to, because beyond line of sight flight is really important. I'd like to do that myself and use the cellular network for sending back data using the Pixhawk 2 and an Intel Edison. But I just want to use a hotspot on it so I can talk to the Edison and get the Edison to talk to the internet. The other thing is that ADSB is critically important for sense and avoid for manned and unmanned aircraft. So manned aircraft uses this right now. If we look at Flight Radar 24 or FlightAware, you can see a whole map filled with tracks and ADSB traffic. So that system has been able to scale to the amount of aviation, commercial aviation that we have right now. But of course we'll have lots more aviation with drones introduced into the airspace. But I think that we should find a way to scale a system like that because it's important. All the other alternatives are very expensive. They require satellite receivers, they require constant connections to a data network, of course cellular, and those things are going to be hard and expensive as is. ADSB works without all of those supplemental systems. It works air to air, air to ground, and ground to air. And you get weather data at the same time for your fleet of aircraft. And with systems like Avionics Ping Station, you can set up your own local ADSB receiver network to manage your own traffic. Let's say in the city of San Diego, where I live, or in the city of New York City, to avoid drones running into manned aircraft that may be flying nearby in Newark or JFK or LaGuardia. So these systems are scalable. We just have to go out and find the solutions that best fit our use case. Because right now we don't actually know how much regulation and conformity or compliance the drone industry can afford. So I think you bring up good questions, because these things are of course requirements or expectations we have of anything we do in the future, but it's also very expensive to comply with these things. That's one of the reasons that most aircraft are hesitant to comply with ADSB and the 2020 mandate that you mentioned to begin with, because most ADSB transponders for your aircraft will cost between $5,000 and $10,000 by the time it gets purchased and installed and certified. So these are very expensive things that we're considering, and then ADSB is an actual reachable option. Avionics has chips available now for transmit and receive, and it's not difficult to comply at the manufacturer's level. So we could have units, drones shipped to us that are already in compliance. So one of the other things you mentioned was all of the noise and the saturation of the ADSB network from all the drones transmitting. I think that's a problem, but I think that's a problem that's worth solving with your own local ping station ADSB receiver networks. And if not, then we have a bigger problem, because in the future air travel will be cheaper and more people will be using the airways, and we need to scale existing systems we have now. A lot of air traffic control is not based on active tracking radar. It's based on beacon tracks. Those are much more affordable radar systems to build. It's very expensive to build, monopulse track and search radar to manage drones and manned aircraft. Drones are very small and they require very, very high resolution radars. So those new expenses that get put onto the air traffic control system will likely be passed on to the drone operators and the commercial industry. And like we said, we don't know how much they can afford to comply with in regulation. I'd like to have a $5 burrito delivered to my lab where I'm working on technology, but the $5 burrito can't come with a $15 delivery fee. So we have to find some feasible solutions. I feel very strongly that ADSB is one of those alternatives that we can use to keep the airways safe and avoid collisions between manned aircraft. And I think the responsibility is on both parties, the manned aircraft and the unmanned aircraft, because both parties have an obligation to avoid collision with each other and with their respective counterparts. Manned aviation is already trying to avoid manned aviation. Unmanned aviation needs to have transmit features to avoid unmanned aviation. So I think it needs to be implemented on both ends for all those reasons. So lastly, the conformance with tail numbers, an N number and registration. I don't think most people will be concerned with that. I'll likely have to do that myself when I get the Ping 2020 installed on my hexacopter. But I think ADSB is a very good idea, and all other aircraft and aviation traffic, such as manned balloons and the ultralight aircraft that you mentioned, they need to conform with this because they have an incentive to not have a drone fly into their airspace when they're flying around. Drone operators don't want to run into drone operators, and they definitely don't want to run into a person flying an ultralight. So I think that this regulation should be conformed to across the board because of the first thing you mentioned. It's now affordable. You can buy transponders for receivers for $175, or you can buy a transceiver for about $1,000. That's not too much to expect if you don't want something to fly into you. So I think you bring up really good points. I hope there are a lot of other folks who have really good points to offer on this topic, and I really hope ADSB is at least the first generation sense and avoid solution for drones and manned aircraft, because if we don't come up with something, I think the other economies in the world and the other aviation controlled airspaces will figure something out and we'll be last to the game. That's not really fun, but thanks for bringing this topic up, and I hope to hear more.